Hi, it's Mimi, a Japanese digital artist. In this video, I'm going to talk about basic anatomy. I'm still learning it myself, but I love drawing full bodies, so I thought I could share some tips with you. Before we start though, I want to mention that I'm not going to go into detail about all the muscles and bones and stuff, but instead we're going to focus on the basic structure and proportions of the human body. So our goal in this video is to understand the structure and proportions of bodies and learn how to draw bodies with good proportions. And to achieve the goal, I've divided this tutorial into two sections. We have basics and practice. In the basics section, we'll talk about how to divide the body into simple shapes, the proportions of the body, how to think in 3D, and the curves in the body. Then we'll move on to the practice section to learn how to combine those basics to actually draw bodies. So grab your pen and follow along if you like. First, we're going to learn how to break down the body into 5 parts using simple shapes to understand the structure easier. So first we have the oval shape for the head, then a cylinder for the neck, and we have the torso, which is like an hourglass shape with a triangle. Then we have legs, and they're made with some different shapes, but we're going to talk more about them in a bit. Lastly, we have the arms, and they're also a combination of some different shapes. Now let's look at each part and study what they look like. So the head is an oval, and I like to add the contour line to indicate the direction that it's facing. The neck is a simple cylinder attached off center to the base depending on the direction the head's facing. If you want to do something a little bit more advanced, you can think of the head as a combination of a circle and an oval. Remember, the human body is rarely made in convenient straight lines, so the neck is naturally slightly off angle rather than straight up and down. The torso is an hourglass shape with a triangle at the bottom. It's important to remember that it looks wider when it's seen from the front than from the side. So think of it as like a squished hourglass. Now, if you are drawing a female body, you need to add boobs, right? Think of them as water bags attached to the torso. They're not as firm as balloons, so they hang off the shoulders and sag with gravity. The legs are mainly made with carrot leg shapes. So we have a big carrot for the thigh, a mini carrot for the shin, a circle for the knee, and a triangle for the foot. And you can apply the same shapes to when you draw a leg from the side. Also, remember what I said about the neck? The legs are not made in straight lines either, so imagine those diagonal lines on the joints rather than horizontal lines. And this helps you draw more organic looking legs. The arms are similar to the legs. We have a carrot for the upper arm and another one for the lower arm, and you can simplify the hand with squares. To make the arms look more organic, you can imagine they are like chains. But that's optional, you can always use simple shapes, especially if you are a beginner. Alright, now let's talk about proportions. Proportions are really important when it comes to drawing bodies. Because even if you get the shapes of the individual parts right, the full body could look strange if the proportions are off. But remember, proportions depend on your art style. There's no right or wrong way to draw, so just find the proportions that work for your style and apply that to your drawings. What I like to do though is to make the body about 7 heads tall. The upper body and the legs are about the same length. The torso is about 2.5 heads tall, and the legs are about 3.5 heads tall. For the width, the shoulders are about 2 heads wide. The waist is 1 head wide, and the hip is about 1.8 heads wide. It's also handy to remember that the upper arm and the lower arm are about the same length. The wrist comes around the same height as the pelvis, and the tip of the fingers comes around the middle of the thigh. The legs are similar to the arms. The upper leg and the lower leg are about the same length. The third topic in this basic section is to try and think in 3D when drawing bodies. It requires practice to think in 3D and perspective, so don't stress out too much if it's hard for you to do at first. It was definitely really hard for me. Always remember to look at reference pictures, try to copy them to practice, and you will eventually learn the patterns and will be able to use them. But I do have a tip to make it a bit easier, so let me talk about it. My tip is to use cross-contour lines. It's a pretty common technique and you might have heard of it, but they're basically lines that cross the form of an object and they help you understand the three-dimensional depth, space, and perspective. I don't think you need to use those lines every time you draw a body, but drawing them can be very helpful if you struggle with getting the shapes right. If you find it too difficult to do it with body parts, it's probably because they're too complex. So if that's the case, practice with simpler shapes like cubes and cylinders, and then try to do it with more complex shapes. Remember, art takes time, but you'll get better as long as you keep practicing, and don't forget to have fun. Lastly, let's talk about the curves on the body. The human body is made in a lot of curves, so using curves can make the body more realistic and organic. There are certain patterns in the curves of the body, and I think the best way to learn them is to observe and copy references. For example, I loved the anime Evangelion when I was younger, and I loved how the legs were drawn in it. So I would just look at the art from Evangelion and try to copy how they drew the legs. And that's basically how I learned how to draw the curves of the legs. So if there are any artists, art styles, or anime that you like, I'd recommend you observe their artworks and trace and copy what you like about them. Alright, now let's draw some bodies and practice how to combine the basics. For this video, I broke down the step of drawing a body in 4 steps. First, we're going to focus on the shoulder line, hip line, the foot line, and the center lines of each part. Then we're going to use those lines as the guidelines and add shapes to make it more like a body. Next, you can add cross-contour lines if you like, but that step is optional. Lastly, we're going to connect the outlines using curves to make it look more organic. Alright, let's try it with one of my illustrations. So when you look at the reference picture first, you want to focus on the shoulder line, hip line, and the foot line. You can also look at the knee line and the breast line if that helps. So I like to start off with drawing the head, and I add the shoulder line, hip line, and foot line. Make sure the length between the head line and the hip line is about the same as the length between the hip line and the foot line. Next, start adding the center line for the torso, legs, and the arms. You don't have to try to draw accurate lines, but try to focus on the overall flow of the body. Then we can start drawing the simple shapes to make it look like an actual body. Here I'm using the simple shapes that we talked about in the basics section. And when you draw these shapes, try to imagine them in a 3-dimensional space rather than a 2-dimensional space. So for this one, it was a bit hard for me to understand the shape of the torso, so I decided to add cross-contour lines on the torso. With these lines, it's a bit easier to see how the torso is rotated, isn't it? Now let's connect everything using curves. This part might be hard if you are not used to drawing bodies, but always remember to observe the reference picture well and try to recreate it as much as you can. Also, if there are certain parts that are hard for you to draw, find references for those specific parts to understand them better. I'm drawing on one layer right now, but you can create a new layer to draw the curves if that's easier for you. Now I'm just erasing the cross-contour lines because I don't need them anymore. Now let's add boobs. So like I said before, imagine 2 water bags are hanging off the shoulders. I'm just cleaning up the lines a little bit more. And we're done. Now let's try the same thing with real life pictures. You can start off with the head, then add shoulder line, hip line, and the foot line. Then add the center lines for the legs and arms. Then you can start drawing the simple shapes. And we can now connect everything with the curves. I'm not going to say anything much from now on because I'm just going to repeat the same things, but follow along and draw with me if you like, and slow down the video if you need to.